questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat or submit them through the Q&A box, and we will get to them during while people are talking, or we will have a Q&A in the last 15 minutes or so of the event. And then additionally, this event will be recorded, so we will be sure to post this on our YouTube channel within 2 business days and send out a notification letting you know that it is available. All right, so with that said, I will pass it along to Joyce to kick off the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kashima, and welcome everybody. My name is Joy Shen. I'm the co-chair of the Career and Connections Committee at the University of Chicago Alumni Club of New York. And I'm really honored to be joined by our esteemed panelists today. They are either alums or parents of alums of U Chicago and practitioners in the fields. And we hope to bring a very compelling conversation and discussion to you and with you regarding AI in healthcare, which is a really hot topic, as you can imagine. The run of show today is I will briefly introduce our panelists, and we'll then ask the panelists to speak to their industry focus and the problems that they are working on every day so that you can get a sense of their focus and their work in healthcare and AI, and we'll proceed to talk about interesting topics in patient care, in digital health, in entrepreneurship in healthcare. And if we have more time, we can cover additional questions, but we want to reserve more time for Q&A from the audience. And so thank you so much for joining us. And we encourage everyone to connect with one another and connect with the panelists. And we have a lot of folks on this webinar, and it is our hope with this event that you get to meet more alumni and more professionals working in the field and sharing similar interests. So with that, let's turn to the panelists. And so we have Sherry Shanker from Palmetto Care. We have Jeff Newberger from Proskauer. We have Annalisa from Baxter International and Sadek from Waymark. And so we have both perspectives from law, large healthcare conglomerates, and startups tackling different problems from different angles. And so let's ask the panelists to talk about their current focus. And we'll start with you, Sadek.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Sadek Patel. I run the data science and AI unit at Waymark, an early stage startup. And so the problem statement that we're really trying to tackle is Medicaid patients face significant health challenges intertwined with social barriers like food insecurity and housing instability, issues traditional healthcare often overlooks. Medicaid patients are some of the lowest income Americans in the United States. And at Waymark, we focus on a key question: how can AI improve care for Medicaid patients, some of America's most underserved communities? And by combining participatory design with peer review, rigorous research, we are trying to build scalable solutions tailored to the unique needs of our Medicaid population, both social and clinical needs.
Thank you, Sadek. Jeff.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here with this great panel. I am co-chair of the Technology, Media, and Telecom practice at Proskauer. So my focus is helping companies of all industries in the use of technology and AI, and a large percentage of my time is in the healthcare space, representing lots of different companies in the healthcare ecosystem, trying to use technology to make their business more efficient, to make it compliant, and to accomplish the mission of the organization, whether it's for profit or not for profit. And of course, in this space, particularly in AI, so much of this is yet to be defined. So I also get very involved in helping clients understand what best practices are, what the industry is, where the industry is going, and trying to look ahead at how to structure business initiatives, which of course is very difficult in the rapidly changing environment that we're living through right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Sherry?
Thanks, Joyce. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. I'm Sherry. I lead the data science team at Pomelo Care. We're a maternal health startup. And, Pomelo was founded because, unfortunately, the standard of care for maternal health has largely not evolved in the last 50 years. And 7 million women in the US have low or no access to maternity care. And so we are building a virtual medical clinic for maternal health for patients in the US. And, in particular, really aiming to have a technology-enabled virtual care model that enables our clinicians to provide evidence-based care at scale, with ultimately the goal of improving patient outcomes for moms and for babies.
Thank you, Sherry. Annalisa.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm so glad to be here with everyone. Delighted to chat about AI in healthcare. I'm Annalisa Daniele Levy. I lead product marketing and strategy for the Connected Care Group at Baxter International. I focus specifically on device and data integration, so between medical devices and each other, between medical devices and hospital IT systems, so including the EHR, and all of that with the aim of facilitating care team collaboration and communication, things like clinical workflow, optimization, operational efficiency, and patient safety.
Excellent. Thank you all panelists. So the first area we will tackle is digital health. And before today's panel, I quickly looked up some stats, and these are massive numbers, and it all relates to digital health and adjacent areas. So the healthcare IT market is expected to reach 1 trillion in about 10 years. And the healthcare digital records market is expected to reach about 42 billion in 10 years. And similarly, the healthcare automation market is expected to reach about 80 billion in about 10 years. And you can look at different analyst reports, but by and large, the magnitude of the opportunities is very similar across the board. And certainly digital health is a big part of that, I imagine. And so we'll start with you, Annalisa, is offering an enterprise perspective as to what are the things you're seeing at digital health? How should we think about the space or the topic?
Yeah, you're hitting on all of the big topics that we keep in mind. So we think about, I'll probably organize this into two buckets. I think about clinician burnout, staff shortages, sort of that clinical experience and what we can do there to make it better. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, let's say, right? The experience is bad, it leads to burnout, it leads to shortages, et cetera, and repeat. And so thinking about things like co-pilots to help with workflow, or thinking about things like Joyce mentioned, like auto documentation, really reducing steps, thinking about finding the right information at the right time in a way that has you looking in one place, right? So this other problem that I'll say I've heard across the board, over time, researching, speaking to CMIOs, CNIOs, CMOs, CIOs, it's so much data. It's in so many different places. How do we think about bringing that together, both from a device perspective, but also from a comprehensive patient, journey perspective? So across time and space, what does that look like? And how do we use that for the ultimate aim, which is, the patient's outcome?
Excellent. And you speak to the challenge or the opportunity with data, and healthcare is a highly regulated industry. Jeff, what are the key considerations or challenges that you're seeing, and what are the things that come up with your clients?
Sure. Well, the opportunities that Annalisa is talking about, resonate so well with me because all those initiatives and the ability to collect data and use it in innovative ways present legal issues. Obviously the largest that everyone really is focused on is privacy, but there are actually other issues as well, including as people talk about bias and hallucinations and the wrong outcomes. So there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of opportunity, and we see new forms of data being collected. So we've talked, we see one of the hot areas right now is neural data and the ability to collect information from people's brains, nervous systems, and use that in AI to come up with new treatments for situations that previously really didn't have any treatment. So those are all great opportunities, but they also present issues around privacy. And the problem is that the law is always a lagging indicator to technology. So there really is no law that deals with neural data, for example. And now we're seeing some of the states, trying to amend their laws to deal with it. But and we also are in a situation where President Biden's executive order on AI has been retracted, and so we're trying to figure out exactly how to help companies be compliant, anticipate what's happening in the future, yet be able to marshal the data that's available in a productive way. So it's an interesting area.
I think that's a great segue and into what Sadek and Sherry are doing. You are leading data scientists at digital health, patient care companies at large. And how do you see your company facilitating patient care or providing value through digital health solutions to your patient population using data, using machine learning, using AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as it relates to Medicaid in particular, I really think AI and machine learning allows us to build scalable and sustainable Medicaid care delivery programs. And so at Waymark, we help Medicaid patients primarily access higher quality primary care by addressing critical social needs, such as housing, food, and transportation supports. And ironically, like, it's these social needs that address roughly 50% of health outcomes for Medicaid patients. And so our care teams, which are equipped with community health workers, social workers, and pharmacists, provide direct in-person support. And what our AI does is first, it identifies our higher risk patients that are more likely to use ED visits and hospitalizations for care they should receive in a primary care physician's office. We also automate administrative work, such as clinical documentation and instantly surfacing relevant local resources when patients identify housing or food support. And it really fundamentally allows our care teams to spend more time on what's essential, helping patients navigate complex healthcare systems and connect to community services that directly impact their health ultimately.
And Sherry, what about you and your
Yeah, I mean,
company?
honestly, it's everything has been a really good setup because it's very similar at Pomelo with the different focus on maternal health, but pretty much we're 24/7 virtual care to supplement what a patient is already receiving through in-person care. And that was, the hypothesis that we had from the beginning and that we validated that there are a lot of gaps in in-person care that we are able to fill by providing a virtual care team for our patients. So we provide patients with a team that includes a nurse, an OB provider, and specialists that they may need, like a therapist or a dietitian. And they can access Pomelo via video, via audio, and via text anytime, depending on what they need. And we've developed a care model that's really focused on providing that personalized care. And that's where, obviously data is really coming in to identify like what are the risk factors associated with this patient, what care are they already receiving, and how do we fill the gaps. There's a lot of these risk factors that we just see again and again, and they are linked to preventable poor outcomes. And we're trying to build this data platform that can identify those and make it actionable to clinicians.
Excellent. I actually want to come back to two things. Maybe the first one will go to Annalisa and Jeff is Sherry and Sadek are building these digital tools of using data and using machine learning to assist patient care teams to do their job effectively, to do it better, innovate on the traditional models. There's discussion or alluded to by Sherry and Sadek about the data they're using, and they're building these models. Annalisa, when you opened with your remark, you talk about co-pilots. And so I'm actually curious regarding what do you see from the big healthcare companies or from your vantage point, given you have worked in healthcare for a very long time? are these going to be adopted at large, more broadly, or in the next few years, we'll see as individuals and in society that more of these innovative tools using generative AI or co-pilot type things will exist through these smaller companies and not necessarily delivered and distributed through larger organizations that have a huge market share.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, right? I think we will see with time. I think, when we think about the clinical care setting and introducing something wholly new, right? Having a co-pilot, this behavioral element of sort of changing what folks do is a really important piece of the world. And then also from the perspective of the large organization that's sort of shifting their model around how they're delivering value. It's a lot harder to shift ourselves away from what we traditionally do. And so I think the opportunity for startups in terms of moving fast and getting to the right precise calibration of the tool, I see that as instinctually something that will make a lot more sense. But I think it stands to be seen again, given the rate of change and sort of the willingness of folks to adopt and the trust that they have in these new tools.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And coming to Jeff, you talked about data, and there are data that we know in healthcare, traditional data. There are potentially new data, as you mentioned, newer data, and probably many other forms. How should entrepreneurs or companies think about healthcare data as relates to potential use by AI or being generated by these generative models, which is now a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and that's the question that people are thinking about and regulators are trying to address. So I think even before the age of AI, health-related information was considered to be sensitive data across almost all the state laws, and of course there's HIPAA on a federal level. So I think entrepreneurs should be looking at health-related data as something that can be a game changer in terms of what they're doing, but they should not take it for granted, and they should make sure that they're following, the right steps. They're being careful about what kinds of consents they're getting, what kinds of disclosures they're making, because if they run afoul of that, even in the new administration, privacy is kind of like a bipartisan issue, and it's easy for somebody to get too excited about the opportunities and cut some corners. But so, and that's, I think, there's this concept of privacy by design. It's sort of an older concept that came out of the FTC. And I think it's even more important now to be thinking about that as people are accumulating health-related data from consumers.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, let's actually keep going with some of the things that we want to talk about. And I already see questions posted in chat and in the Q&A. Please keep them coming. And to the extent that we can incorporate them into our panel, we will do that. Otherwise, we will leave those questions to the very end. So please keep them coming. So back to taking technology as an enablement to transform healthcare for all of us is challenging. We know it's challenging, but what are some of the specific challenges that you are facing as you're building these new products? And perhaps, Sherry, we start with you.
Sure. So, one of the biggest challenges for us is that for any given patient, there's just so much information coming from all these different systems, the EHR and claims data and patient-reported data. And there's so many different things that a clinician could focus on that would potentially improve this patient's care. And so without technology, clinicians would end up spending a ton of time reviewing all these sources in order to determine what's relevant and what to do. So to really make our clinicians operate effectively, I spend a lot of my time thinking about kind of two things. One is how do we codify everything that's in the brains of our clinicians into our technology? So, a clinician can look at a patient's chart and say, oh, this patient is at risk for this condition, or this patient most needs extra attention. And, we're never going to replace that, and we don't want to, but how do we make it easier for the clinician to see that and guide clinicians towards to making those kind of instinctual distinctions faster? And the second part of that is kind of how do we surface the most relevant information about each patient at the right time, right? We want to surface someone as soon as they went to the ER, right before they're going to go to the ER, if ideally, so that, and that's something that, a clinician can't do if they're responsible for 500 or more patients, but that's where really data can add a lot of value.
So the first point you talked about is really how to create that representation of your clinicians and translate that into your models or figure out how to curate your data in a way so that you can generate the right representations as you build out these different models or algorithms.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Two important things. We may come back to them. Sadik, what about you?
Yeah, I
How
think I think Sherry articulated some really critical points, and I want to plus 100 each of them. I think to add a few more thoughts to it, I think the things that I really think a lot about are model explainability. Um, our audiences are both care team members, but also clinicians as well. And so to be able to demonstrate that the models that we build to target patients also can provide some context regarding the reasons for which we're targeting those patients. I think a second component that we work through those challenges is how to demonstrate an ROI through some form of an RCT or natural experiment. Does a world with an ML targeting algorithm perform better than a world of random selection when you're randomly selecting patients to outreach from a list? And I think that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And ultimately, our care team members are the consumers of our technology and our algorithm. And so making sure that we're incorporating their feedback into the tools and more so ensuring they feel that their voices are recognized and heard and reflected in the AI or the algorithms that we build are really important for myself and my team.
Excellent. There was a question earlier, and it's not specific to exactly specific to what we just discussed, but I think it's related, which is about clinical decision support. And what do you think of that as you build these models and digital products? Where do you draw the line as to we're actually providing clinical decision support, or we are augmenting the clinicians, but it's different than clinical decision support if there is that actual distinction. How do you think about that? Maybe we'll just open up to share Sadik, Annalisa, and then Jeff.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I think we're not it's really clinician enablement and decision support as opposed to, when I was working in the oncology space before, and it was a bit more focused on a very specific medication recommendation or something like this, where we're kind of taking our clinician care model and putting and making that uh accessible to our clinicians faster, but very much kind of working really closely with our clinicians to make sure that they essentially have the final say in terms of what's happening for a given patient. I just don't think we're at the place yet, honestly, with the models to be able to feel like a model should be dictating what happens for a patient, at least in the maternity care space.
I would echo the same thing. I think across the board, I think this idea that it's more of a complementary tool that enhances the clinician, that supports the clinician, that the clinician can use to create a larger, more robust picture of the world is sort of the way that we've seen this be more amenable, palatable, to the clinician audience. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, right? The psychological reasons, the trust building that I think we still need to we get to with these new technologies and with AI, right? So I think it is more of that complementary tool that we're thinking about.
Yeah, one thing, two ideas that I think about, and I think this lines up really nicely with Sherry and Annalise's responses, is workflow alignment and to what extent we can use model explainability to help health systems kind of move patients into various workflows, whether that's a pharmacy workflow, a workflow with a nurse practitioner, maybe a primary care physician or a specialty physician based on the clinical indicators that we're finding. I think a second way that I think about this problem is from a population health perspective. A lot of clinicians at a clinician-patient relationship, and we found this with some of the clinicians we were working on with some of the targeting algorithms, is they're making the decisions on an individual basis, but having some pop health tool that sort of allows them to have like a flag or an indicator or a nudge in some ways gives them that extra context, but also that extra focus or attention could be helpful as well.
I would just add from a legal perspective, I'm actually relieved to hear the comments of my co-panelists because the laws that are addressing AI at this point, and there are a few in Europe and here in the States, in AI in the healthcare space, they categorize the risk, and the risk of a healthcare practitioner who is relying on AI and without any human oversight is treated as a higher level of risk and requires additional disclosures and consent. While if a practitioner is actually reviewing and using the AI as a tool, that is a more moderate level of risk. So that's all good. The concern is still that a physician or practitioner will rely on the tool even though they're not supposed to. And so, it's important for organizations to have guardrails and policies that inform people about how to use these tools effectively and safely.
If we have time, we'll come back to some of this topic. I know one of the questions asks about biases and how do we think about that. And so again, we can come back to that. Let's keep going and talk about role of AI in healthcare. Obviously, it's a huge topic because healthcare spans a lot of different areas, and from computational biology all the way to patient-centric care and so forth. But from your perspective, what's exciting? What's coming? What do you see? Really just want to open up the panel and share with your audience. And Annalisa, can we have you go first?
Sure. And just speaking personally, I'm really excited about the possibility of prediction, prevention, and individualization as it relates to disease. We're already, I think, in a moment where we're diagnosing things faster and better. But we have a long road ahead, I think, and especially in the context of what AI can do and what we're able to actually operationalize. The other side of that is, I'm nervous about getting to a point where there is this potential for tremendous benefit. And then to Jeff's points about, the law regulations catching up and sort of allowing us to, benefit from that full available, value is something that I think about.
Jeff?
Well, I am excited about the future. I would like there to be a consistent set of principles that everybody understands so that we can all move forward and have productive initiatives. It's really a boardroom issue. I've been in several board meetings where, there's a desire for direction. And, frankly, right now we're sort of in a state of uncertainty in terms of what direction things are going to go. But I am excited about the time that will come at some point where there is clear guardrails and businesses can develop AI solutions and be effective and again meet their mission, whether it's not for profit or commercial success.
Sherry?
Yeah, I think I, alluded to this a bit before, but something that I think is really important is how do you have humans at the center of the interaction, but include there is a lot of value that AI can provide. And Pamela, we've already seen a lot of how like an LLM has this really broad understanding and how the technology has gotten so much better in terms of how fast we can develop a model and deploy it. The thing that I think is missing that I'm really excited for and that we're working on is how do we combine the LLM with the clinical context and the guidelines to be able to make decisions that we can trust or suggestions, really, I should say, that we can trust. And so how do we use like the broad context of the LLM to understand like patient engagement and motivation and the things that's actually not really healthcare specific, but really important when you're doing virtual care, but at the same time have very specific guardrails around things like medication, understanding pregnancy stage and symptoms and all of these things, and putting these two things together into one kind of system, I think is something that there's like a lot of room to innovate on and will unlock a lot of really exciting use cases.
We may come back to something you just said, but we'll have Sadik go next.
Yeah, I think what excites me the most is evaluating the real world impact to the extent that we can build AI tools and deploy them in some RCT or natural experiment and understand what the return on investment is or what the improvement in healthcare was or the patient outcomes, I think is really profound, but then also being able to share that knowledge more broadly and sort of build this federated approach of developing ML and AI within healthcare is something that I think a lot about and I think really excites me about this space.
Excellent. I'm sure in top people's mind is the large language models and healthcare. And Sherry, you spoke to this a bit, and I think as practicing data scientists, we see the tremendous advancement in these models and what they can do. As relates to what you said earlier, which is working with these really powerful models, and yet really think about how they can be used to serve your specific patient population and answer specific questions. Um, what are some of the best practices? What are some of the outstanding questions that you want the audience to think about? Because perhaps large language model isn't that one single shot silver bullet to answer all medical questions to the level of sufficiency needed to serve your patient population.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the biggest thing I tell, my team and everyone who I'm working with when LLMs come up is like the first thing is the actual like really understand the problem you're trying to solve and don't treat, an LLM as, the magic solution to all of them. So really understand what's going on with clinicians and why are things going wrong. And sometimes it's like, oh, we need a flag based on some very clear information that we have doesn't require an LLM in order to solve the problem. And then if you do feel like it's something where that kind of like broad understanding that I mentioned, and it's a really kind of like a vague problem of human understanding with a lot of different data, then I think it's really getting specific on like what the success looks like for that specific use case and making sure you have a way to measure. That's like a problem that we've hit a lot. And you have to invest in building that kind of golden data or the source of truth that's going to be able to tell you, okay, this is working, this is not, getting the clinician feedback on that, because ultimately you might build something that looks okay to a data scientist and then you put it in front of a clinician, they're like, oh, well, actually, and that's the biggest investment to make.
Okay. And Sadik, you mentioned a couple of times about RCT, random control trials and experiments. And can you speak a little bit more about how to evaluate AI-based healthcare solution, largely using these more advanced models. What are some of the best practices? Open questions.
That's a great question. So, we typically will file an NIH application to create an RCT, and oftentimes we'll create three arms to the RCT where we'd randomize patients, and it's really less about the specific LLM model, but more about the LLM based care delivery versus a human delivered care. And what we're trying to evaluate is, does the LLM increase efficiency? For example, if we have an LLM performing SMS outreach for a patient versus a human being performing SMS outreach, how much time is involved to get a response from the patient? And what is the decrease in efficiency and the increase in response rates? When we have a PCP, an LLM schedule visits at a primary care physician's doctor office versus a human being on our care team doing that, to what extent does that decrease the amount of time our care team members are spending on the phone? And to what extent are we increasing the number of doctor's appointments we're scheduling through AI versus through a human being? And so we'll try to test, the human only versus the AI version to understand the efficacy, but also the efficiency gains as well.
One more question, and I think this is not something we discussed, prior to the call, but another major area that people often think about in healthcare is ethics and bias. Specific as relates to ethics, there has been many companies built in mental health. There are digital therapists powered by these different models, and oftentimes people ask, is it ethical? Is it the right thing for a patient or individual to talk to a digital therapist that's now can have a lot of things that digital therapists say come from a generative model effectively? What's your view on that? Your personal view on that? Is it something that's been discussed in the industry as practitioner in AI? What's your view on that?
So this is a challenging question, and one internally as a team we're still struggling with. We're right now trying to evaluate whether we want to use an LLM for patient outreach through an SMS tool, and to be able to have that SMS tool geared based on the patient's clinical records to make it more personalized. And so we're building to a point where we feel comfortable having an AI bot speak directly to the patient. Right now, our main focus is trying to have the AI bot speak to individuals that can help schedule the visit for the patient. And so not directly to the patient, but to the receptionist at the primary care physician's office. I think over time, as we get more comfortable with these tools, we're going to get closer and closer to having those conversations directly with the patient, but we're just not there yet.
Anyone else? All right, we may come back to that. Annalisa, you want to share something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky, yeah, of course. And, I think about folks who really need mental health and don't have access to it. And so, I think it'd be a situation where you'd want to weigh the cost benefit and try to limit the negative, and in the context of training the model, and thinking through like what are the possible scenarios there. I won't comment on sort of like the way to approach that, and how to think about those things. But, I think it's a really good question, and something we should think really hard about.
Right. Okay, last topic, and then we will tackle questions in Q&A and chat. So we had AI Startup Showcase by U Chicago alumni last week. Entrepreneurship is huge and growing at University of Chicago. So we're going to talk about entrepreneurship and in AI and healthcare. what are some of the considerations and advice for entrepreneurs or people who are thinking about building solutions in healthcare or touching healthcare? Jeff, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, first of all, obviously, this is a very regulated entity, a regulated area. So, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be aware of what regulations apply to whatever your business plan is. Um, the other thing to keep in mind is intellectual property ownership. Many entrepreneurs are trying to get their business off the ground as quickly as possible. They're, not really taking the time to get the appropriate agreements signed with their colleagues. And down the road, when the business is successful and is, looking for financing and, the investor is doing diligence on the company, they find that the company may not actually own their IP. So then that's an issue not only in healthcare, across the board, all industries. Um, I think that, you asked earlier the question about Copilot and, whether companies are going to be using Copilot. I think that every business today should assume that their employees are using some form of generative AI, and particularly in the software development area. So I think it's important for entrepreneurs to keep that in mind and to have right now, but I am sure that at some point it's going to swing again. And so I would advise anybody who's building a business to take privacy very seriously, even if today it's not necessarily an issue in every state. Um, but it's going to be, it's a bipartisan issue. So I would advise that be the focus of an entrepreneur.
Thanks, Jeff. Annalisa?
Sure. So, I mean, from my perspective, as someone who's talked to a number of startups at Baxter when I was in the BD&L sort of space, companies like mine, 16 billion in revenue, 60,000 people, that massive sort of structure, right, lacks speed and agility, which is what startups, represent. So they can be very attractive, to us. And I think much like an interview, in fact, for a job, right? Being really specific and truly understanding where the company plays, where they might be able to extend themselves, how, why. The folks that I've been impressed with have done their thoughtful research and are coming with recommendations and solutions. They are also folks who've thought about scalability of their product, application to our customer set, right? Again, it's this thoughtfulness that's really helpful. And then being upfront about limitations. So those things bear themselves out, right? So if they're, the radar, people don't realize it as much. You're sort of being evaluated from the beginning on whether you'd be a good partner to work with, like that first phone call. So really basic things like being courteous, being responsive. If folks ask you for a deck, I mean, you should show up with a deck. It should be customized. But if you don't, or if they ask for follow-up, the faster you are, the faster the more you'll be at the front of their mind. We've got a lot of stuff going on. You really need to stand out. And I'll say, when I was focused on predictive analytics and diagnostics a few years ago, I mean, the volume of stuff coming in, and a lot of it looks really similar. So you really want to take that sort of unique, calibrated approach to the organization that you're speaking to.
Yeah, I love the advice that, Jeff and Annalisa, you just provided. I think especially in healthcare, the startups really rely on existing channels to reach these markets. And I hope those folks who are entrepreneurs and are considering taking this advice and taking notes. What about you, Sadek?
The things I think about from my perspective, just the importance of data. I think HIPAA is a key part, but also being able to have data in a format where you can build predictive models and easily action against them is really key. Another area that I think about often is how do we differentiate our capabilities from any other healthcare startup in the space, and what mechanisms can we use, whether it's the peer review process to put our work out there for critique and publication, that can demonstrate the value of our predictive capabilities in comparison to other organizations, to differentiate our work. And I think finally, and one thing that I've really gained a deeper appreciation of is the position of clinicians in the healthcare space and the importance of buy-in from clinicians for the clinical decision-making models that you present to them. And I think that's something as a data scientist with a very AI engineering orientation you might take for granted. But it's such a critical thing to have that stakeholder buy-in, especially from the clinical operations staff.
Thanks, Sadek. Cher, we will end with you on this question.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what Sadek was saying about, clinicians being so important here. Another thing I'd say from the data side is really focus on what is the problem you've identified and where can data provide the most value. I think with now there's so much data, especially in healthcare, and we have all these BI tools and everyone has a database, and it's really important to invest in making that data structured and usable to a lot of people. But then it actually becomes, I think, the role of the data team to keep all your end stakeholders focused on like not just what data do you want, but what question are you trying to answer, and how do we make sure that we're laser focused on answering those questions and going the last mile. I think you don't want like 100 different dashboards that you actually haven't made the decision. So really staying focused on what's the problem you're trying to solve for the patient or for your customer, and bringing every single data question back to that.
Excellent. I think what you and Sadek said, coming from data science and startup perspective, echo a lot of the points that Annalisa talked about, specific differentiation and also the intellectual property considerations that Jeff was speaking to. So I think this is all connected. Any additional comments from our panelists before we take audience questions? Any additional remarks, thoughts you want to share with the audience? All right, let's tackle some questions. So I think the first question is, do the major large language models have access to information in all of the medical journals? Who wants to take this question? If not,
I don't have an exact answer. Or Jeff, did you want to go first?
No, go ahead, please.
I don't have an exact answer. I think like maybe, but I guess what I'll comment on, like something that's kind of related, is like something we found is like LLMs can have access to a lot of information and not interpret it correctly. So we found that, for example, we get much better performance if we do the math for an LLM and say like, not just this is the raw data, but like, and we're going to tell you this is the gestational age of a patient. So sometimes I think it's kind of, I can see where this question is coming from. It's like, oh, you give it the medical journal and it'll figure all this stuff out. But I think that interpretation layer is something that at least we're seeing in our early work is still really important. But I'm curious, like the exact technical answer here.
Well, I would just say that to the extent that a medical journal has been published on the web without any sort of credentialed access or subscription, it has likely been ingested into the major generative AI models. I mean, and that is the source of ongoing litigation against pretty much all the major platforms, as to whether that kind of ingestion, the scraping of that content is a copyright infringement or not. So yes, the answer is yes, the data is to the extent it was published on the web, it has been ingested.
Thank you both. And I would just add that there are also specific large language models for biomedical that may actually take in additional data. And so I think it's a positive to that question that you can assume that's the case, and there are more large language models specific to healthcare, medical industry, and domain. The second question, maybe Cher, we start with you, is you talk about codify clinicians' thinking, essentially thinking about that representation. What are some of the mitigation strategies as it relates to mitigating the biases that may come up, and whether that is from the clinician side or the codification process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple of things come to mind. The first is making sure we're distinguishing between a negative, so someone does not have a certain condition, and lack of information, because there's definitely a lot of bias where certain patients who are receiving medical care are then going to have more complete information than someone who isn't. And for patients where we don't know, that's where we really need one of the places where we really need to rely on clinicians to go and gather that information so that we're not biasing the data that way. And the other thing is building the feedback mechanisms directly into the tool and the technology. So for any kind of system that we're codifying where the algorithm might be guiding a certain action, clinicians are reviewing that information, and then we're able to take that, review data back and analyze it and understand what's going on in terms of potential biases in the data.
Right. So human evaluation, human in the loop is a big part of that. I think we have covered some questions regarding monetization of healthcare solutions and law and governance and the changing nature of that. Jeff, as you talk about that swinging pendulum, but perhaps talking about the current process, I suppose, in the US. So a lot of the new technology in healthcare, their success is driven by reimbursements and the support of the large players in the industry. I don't know if any panelists can answer this question, but what are the prospects of getting special reimbursement for AI? Or as the other way to ask this question or variation of this is, are there different paths for AI healthcare solutions to monetize and scale and circumvent perhaps some of the existing payer constraints? Anyone has any perspective to this question? I mean, I can speak to my experience. I think this is very challenging. I think for any early stage healthcare startups, this is one of their biggest blockers and barriers. And so from my perspective, I think this is part of the reason that we see many of the healthcare startups are consumer oriented and direct to consumer, and trying to first build that adoption before tackling the larger system, getting reimbursement code, getting approval from FDA, et cetera. Certainly, it takes huge investments and time.
And I guess the thought would be that as, these tools help to improve outcomes and we can point to that, then we'll hopefully move into, more reimbursement sort of context.
All right. Let's another question is, do you see a future where AI will replace, for example, radiologists while reading scans, or replacing certain type of doctors, for example, primary doctors, because referrals can be automated based on patient intake information, etc. What's the world that you envision as technologists and innovators?
I view a world where AI and technology effectively become a companion or a co-pilot to clinicians, um, and a world where all the challenges that patients have accessing healthcare in some ways or in many ways are automated or um, are reduced because of AI and automations. That's the world I envision, and where healthcare and clinicians in particular are really focusing on delivering patient care, and patients are spending less time trying to get into the doctor's office.
Yeah, I would hugely agree with that. I think just observing how our virtual clinic operates and the number of obstacles are in the way for patients getting care, whether it's their social needs that are outside of the healthcare system or being able to find a doctor who accepts their insurance and get an appointment in a reasonable time. I think if we can solve all of those problems and solve all the kind of drop balls, as we say in healthcare, that would be an incredible win. And really maybe after that, then it's really I mean, in addition to that, it's the clinical decision support piece. But I think the complexity is just so immense, and there's like a lot of opportunity there.
All right, we have one more minute, so we'll take perhaps we take one more question. Um, um, how do you stay on top of the changing regulations or the news in healthcare industry or news in AI and healthcare?
Well, I can take a shot at that one. There's a tremendous amount of information that's available. Most of it, or a large portion of it, is true and accurate. Not all of it, obviously. So it requires a lot of reading, and of course, watching what comes out of the government. And then, for me, a lot of my information comes from clients. Clients throughout, the technology life cycle have always kept me up to date on what the latest developments are, and that's the best way for me to stay current as a lawyer.
Thanks, Jeff. Others? How do you stay on top of developments?
Yeah, I think the news that presents itself to me via algorithms itself is already tuned to the type of technological advancements I'm interested in, and so I'm similar to what Jeff is talking about, just looking, in a discerning way at, who's putting this out, what's the topic, what's the latest news of the day, what should I know about DeepSeek or whoever it is, right? So it's just staying attuned kind of every day to what's going on.
Any other comments from Sadek or Sherry?
I think just making a commitment to reading the latest trends in healthcare AI is so important, including CMS policy, and that's something that I focus on, especially health and human services and CMS policy as it relates to both HIPAA regulations, but also AI. I find to be very informative.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is then kind of I definitely lean a lot on the experts, at Pomelo and that other people are talking to who really understand that space more than I do as a data scientist and getting their interpretation on top of the news that's happening, of kind of hearing how it's impacting our customers or us directly, and really kind of getting that extra layer of knowledge.
Son. Well, we're 2 minutes over, and unfortunately, we can't cover more questions because we want to be considerate of your time. Thank you so much for everyone who have joined us tonight for this AI and healthcare panel. And I want to thank the panelists for sharing your perspectives and coming together and answer some of these really challenging questions, some of which are still very much open. And again, part of the purpose of this panel is to facilitate connections among alumni and friends of University of Chicago. And so we encourage you all to connect with one another and connect with the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.